Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War news update. First part there for the 28th of July 2024. So I'm a little bit later than I normally would be. It is a beautiful day in the UK and I was out having a cup of tea with the missus down in the garden. And there you go. But then whenever I say things like that, I think, at least I'm not on the front lines in Ukraine having ordnance rain down on me, cowering in a dugout or something like that. So always worth remembering. Okay, for the Russian losses, Ukrainian general staff figures for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can find them in the description to the video below. Some fairly significant numbers here. 1,180 personnel lost, which is pretty much where we've seen it. It's been a little bit up and down, a couple of days below 1,000, but generally around that mark. 13 tanks is pretty high number of tanks to lose in a day. That is above the daily average. 21 armored personnel vehicles, likewise a snip above the daily average. 51 artillery systems, about 3 times the daily average. So that is really challenging for the Russians. Sorry, we'll see some stats on this in a second. 2 multiple launch rocket systems and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We'll see if they are on Andrew Perpetua's lists. We have 2 of them today, and 1 is massive. 72 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very high number in that category as well. No pieces of special equipment today. Okay, so let's go to the list from yesterday. It's not the most recent one. Richard Vereka from War Spotting, so the Oryx equivalent that counts up visually confirmed losses. Russian artillery is taking a hammering right now, mostly because of FPV drones. War Spotting and Andrew use different methods for compiling their lists. One big one being that War Spotting does not include damaged in their headline totals. So don't expect all of these to appear on my graphs, which are based on War Spotting numbers, but that does not mean they are not happening. And there could be more that don't make it to Andrew's list. Now, Andrew had an update or a reminder for his viewers on last night's live stream of what denotes damaged and what denotes destroyed. So damage is literally just that you can have some things that might have got a broken window and will carry on driving, and it's not going to stop a vehicle or a piece of equipment from being used. So some of these will not be too problematic for whoever controls that piece of equipment, but some damaged equipment might be unusable and might in fact be beyond economic repair, as we might say in the car industry. So yeah, it is there's a wide remit for that category, right? But it is what it is, and you know, for things like artillery, it's very difficult to know how much damage has been caused to what is quite a simplistic piece of equipment compared to a self-propelled gun that has ammunition on board and that can fundamentally disassemble, like blow up catastrophically, and you know that is destroyed. With a towed howitzer, where there are only a few moving parts, you hit maybe one of the legs with an FPV drone, and yeah, it might be damaged. You might hit a tire, for example, and blow up the tire, but it's not going to stop the howitzer from being used. To bear that in mind when we see these lists of damage, which is why I always talk about what proportion of equipment is destroyed and abandoned as opposed to damaged. So when you look at the combat losses here outside of artillery for the Russians, or this yellow, green, olive green and orange there, almost all of them are destroyed and abandoned, which is exactly what the Ukrainians would want. So anyway, we'll start with the Ukrainians on this very long list, but we can see just to start with that the list is about a 3-4 to 1, and it's a very long list. So this is a bit of a problem day for the Russians, and that's mainly in the artillery category there. So for the Ukrainians, they've lost an AN/TPQ-50 radar, slowly creeping fire. So it could be something blew up nearby, and then a grass fire came up and consumed the radar. Not sure, haven't seen it. We've got some artillery, Lancet shelling, Krasnopol, which is a laser guided munition there, all given as reasons this artillery was taken out. We have an FH-70 destroyed, Panzerhauser 2000 damaged, and some other howitzers thrown in there. So Panzerhowitzer 2000, that's going to be a bit of a challenge having that damage. Then we have some tanks, mainly destroyed, T-80, T-72, T-64 BVs. So a few different tanks there. APCs, most of them, well, just over 50% actually, destroyed or abandoned. M113s, Humvee, FV-103 Spartan, M113 Humvee. So only that MTLB at the end, which is a question mark, might not be a Western provided one. I have a captured MRAP Kozak 5 and an abandoned Max Pro. So quite a few bits of kit on this list, but it's interesting looking at the variety of ways that this equipment has been destroyed. So it's not all about FPV drones, and when there are other types of drones like drone dropping, drone dropped bombs. So those not FPV drones, but other drones that you're looking down, not looking forward with. But yeah, Molniya drone, and which is a bit like a Lancet. Lots of Lancets, shelling, and so on and so forth. Now, when we come to the Russian losses, we have a Pantsir S1, another Pantsir that's been added to the one that Andrew Perpetua added the other day. Then we've got Electronic Warfare Striz 3 taken out there, and a couple of surveillance and comms bits of equipment. Then it's just a massive, massive list of artillery here, and almost all on D20s and, well, really D30s. That's because there was a huge video of a montage of huge numbers of artillery being taken out, and that's broadly where that's been taken from. So as you can see, almost all of these FPV drones, and it's a real unknown as to whether they have been incapacitated, these pieces of artillery, or whether it's just, brush them off and get on with firing. So, what percentage of these are still being used, like the day after they've been hit, is completely unknown. But an awful lot of equipment, of artillery equipment, is on the list today. And that is unusual because there isn't so much evidence usually of artillery getting taken out. You usually see things on the contact line. Andrew Perpetua is looking at satellite imagery that shows destroyed or damaged vehicles, and then looks at other videos that are more often coming out the contact line rather than 20 kilometers behind it where artillery is being targeted. Then we have some tanks here, a couple of track garden sheds, T-80BV, T-62, all the usual stuff. Some track garden shed in the IFV category, but BMPs and BTRs, BMDs, all the usual culprits here, MTLBs. So lots of different equipment. A lot of equipment being lost. It includes quite a bit of civilian equipment being destroyed as well. So loafs and SUVs and all sorts, more so than the Ukrainian civilian losses. So that's a really challenging day of losses there. Russians, 94 losses, 57 are combat losses. For the Ukrainians, 33 losses in total. So that's actually a 3-to-1 advantage there. Or ratio there, and 21 are combat losses. So actually, 57 to 21, so just over 2-to-1 ratio of combat losses from Russian to Ukrainian combat losses. And a lot of that artillery, 31 artilleries, 27 of which are FPV drones in the counter battery role. So rather than having counter battery artillery taking out other artillery, you have drones fulfilling that function of counter battery. Now, this is a video that has lots of artillery pieces on. Here's an M46 that's targeted. And what you have with those FPV drones, I won't play it to you because I'll get in trouble, but all these should be linked on the video below. You get the FPV drones, flying into these things and cutting out. So they're obviously detonating, but you just don't know what damage they have done at all. As Max24 says, destruction of a large number of Russian howitzers in the Chasiv Yar direction, 24 separate motor mechanized brigade. It's quite a bit of footage floating around of all sorts of different bits of kit being targeted. This is, as mentioned, just a series of howitzers being taken out, or at least damaged, one would think. Right, then we go on to the more recent list from Andrew, which is from this morning, just a few hours ago. And we have, I guess, 2.5 to 1, 3 to 1 at the most, maybe, ratio. Combat losses are definitely in favour of the Ukrainians there. Hardly any combat losses for the Ukrainians. Russians losing quite a lot. Let's go and have a look at these losses. So we have a couple of Bradleys damaged. They've lost a few, or they've had a number of Bradleys damaged recently, and you hope that they're getting some provided. It looks like the actual PDA, the Presidential Drawdown Authority, aid packages coming from the US have dropped off in the last month, but then there was talk that they're going to be given everything by November because of the election. So watch out, there could be some big packages coming soon. A couple of destroyed senators, so those are the Rochelle senators coming from Canada. The guy that runs it is of Israeli descent, whose wife is Ukrainian, I think, and they employ lots of Ukrainian refugees, and they are providing huge numbers of vehicles to Ukraine from Canada. But the senators aren't exactly the sort of vehicles you would want on the front lines. They're not MRAPs. They're not mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. And there was some thought that they would be, and some complaints from a few Ukrainians saying that, hey, these aren't exactly, the best thing to use on the front line. And well, yeah, they're not designed for that. So it's horses for courses. A few bits of artillery, lots of civilian vehicles and trucks, and nothing too serious there at all. And then there are some boats, a lot more boats turning up on both lists at the moment. Then when we come up to the Russian losses, you got that Su-34. That was other notes. How did it get blown up? Pilot skill. So that was the training one that crashed that Russians admitted yesterday. And I did that breaking news piece on the strategic bombers being targeted in Olenia airfield, 1,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian front line. But there's also that training plane that went down. Surveillance and comms equipment, quite a bit of that. Boats, artillery, fair number of pieces of artillery there of differing types. Tanks, just 6 tanks to add to that. Not too many destroyed or abandoned. Most of the IFVs destroyed and abandoned there, but not a massive list of those. BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, a single APC. But just mainly artillery, really, that's the biggest category there. Unusual again, because we don't see too much artillery destruction footage. And then a number of civilian vehicles and unknown ones at the end. So the Russians just losing a whole mass of equipment a couple of days in a row. But just in general, I know I keep saying it, but this just has to be unsustainable. And it is, because we've seen a completely different behavior for the Russians in terms of the number of vehicles they are using and the types of vehicles they're using. That said, there have been a couple of massive attacks recently that have used more vehicles than we are used to seeing. So we've been so used to seeing 1s, 2s and 3s attacking that the other day when they attacked supposedly with 57 vehicles near Novomykhailivka, I think it was, or somewhere around there. That was a really big surprise. Now, they were apparently repelled, but then they attacked the next day. And then there's another attack here, which was supposedly halted. I think this might have been in Krasnohorivka. But anyway, Ukrainian forces coordinated an attack on an advancing Russian column of armoured vehicles, resulting in the destruction of tanks and BMPs. The Russian advance was halted. And I can't really play you this as ever, but just to let you know that, again, you've got quite a few vehicles being used. Okay, there's only 6 here. It's not the biggest of attacks. So again, you could argue that this is now seen as a big attack, but actually there's only 6 vehicles. What's also worth noting is the number of other vehicles that are just lying here. Look, I presume that's one up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm not even looking hard, right? And there's 8 vehicles already completely destroyed. And then you've got 6 more vehicles. And what happens with these vehicles is they come down here. And I think that the first vehicle, which happens around here. So I think it's one of these that comes down here. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't get hit by a mine. Like, all these vehicles are going in the same place. There's no mine. And then one stops and gets hit. And I think it's by an artillery shell, a direct hit from an artillery shell. Then you get another artillery shell goes off over here. And then this front vehicle, or this one maybe as it goes past, then comes back to where this other vehicle was that had been blown up. And then that gets blown up. And again, I think it's by an artillery shell. I think all of these explosions here are from direct hits from artillery shells. But I may be wrong. There's another artillery shell going off in the woods just next to it. So I think this is not mines, which is interesting. So it shows that the Ukrainians have got artillery ammunition, and it shows they're able to use it really, really accurately. Quite why a Russian vehicle would stop, just like, don't stop, Russians, but they do. It gets hit, and lots of people still get out and run away. But this is an example of another Russian attack being foiled by the Ukrainians and being pretty destructive for the Russians. They're just losing a phenomenal amount of kit. Now, Ukraine's military, that's not to say it's not difficult for the Ukrainians. There are areas of the cross sector where the Russians are really pressuring. The Ukrainians are on the back foot around Pokrovsk, that Avdiivka front. There are other areas of the front line that I think that Krasnohorivka's basically lost. The Russians are advancing, but the question is always, at what cost? Military intelligence released a string of other claims after saying they hit a Russian Tu-22. So just to remind you, the breaking news update I did yesterday is at 1,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian front line, up in near Finland, basically, is this air base where they have a number of these Tu-22 strategic bombers that don't need to get close to Ukraine to release their missiles. So some of these missiles have like 2,000 kilometer range. So you just take off from around there, whack these missiles into the air, and they go and find their way to Ukraine. Well, Ukraine has hit one of these. Now, there doesn't seem to be any direct evidence of that yet, and you wouldn't expect there to be. This has happened on a base a long way away. So at the most, you're going to get satellite imagery that passes over at some point. But then after that, so as Tim White said, new claims that on the 21st of July, so this is a little while ago, a week ago, the Ukrainians struck the National Center of Helicopter Construction of Mil and Kamov. Two machines, a Mi-28 and a Ka-226, were allegedly hit. And 3 days later, saboteurs destroyed a Mi-8 helicopter in Kryaz airfield in Samara. So that's potentially 3 helicopters added to the lost lists. And then you've got that Su-34 that came down in a training flight in the Volgograd region. It's a bad day for the Russian VKS. They have lost, it appears, quite a number of bits of kit. That one, just to remind you, is a Su-34, was no ammunition on board. The crew did survive, but there's video evidence of that taking place. So, the crash site was filmed pretty much straight after the plane crash. So that's why that's been added to Andrew Perpetua's lost list. So here we have it. Ukrainian intelligence reportedly struck 3 Russian helicopters in a week, according to RBC. Really good week's work for the Ukrainians there. And there is some satellite imagery and some video imagery to support those claims as well, or at least some of those claims, because I think there are various incidents. So you can go and find that out variously online. But yes, good news there. Now, there were also, this is what RBC said. So night of 21st, enemy Mi-28, Ka-226 helicopters were damaged in the territory of the Joint Stock Company, yada, 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 as a result of sabotage activities of the GUR. Also, on the 24th, as a result of sabotage, a Mi-8 multipurpose helicopter was destroyed in the territory of the airfield at Kryaz in Samara. So all of those was actually sabotage. I think I forgot to show this, but this happened the other day. I didn't know whether it was sabotage or a maintenance or a strike. But basically, a gas production facility blew up in Yamolo-Nenets, 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine. Is this the same that it's just a gas pipeline on fire as well? So some really big infrastructural problems remaining for Russia across the country and sometimes very far from Ukraine. Okay, moving on to just a slightly separate topic. We'll just dwell on this for a second. The biggest bit of news is actually going around this morning is what's happened in Mali. So the Ruzic unit reported that about 80 of Wagner's employees were killed during an ambush in Mali. He directly appealed to the Defense Minister Boulissov for help in his Telegram message. The situation is truly extraordinary. So I don't really know the situation in Mali, but the Wagner are, I think, fighting on behalf. There's a coup there recently, and I presume they're fighting on behalf of the government that's now taken over, the military government, against, is it the Tuareg rebels? But anyway, commander of the 13th Assault Unit, call sign Rusik, says, currently on the territory of the Republic of Mali in the area of the city of Tinzawatin, the Malian armed forces are conducting an operation with the support of Wagner. To be specific, they were supported by the 13th Assault Unit, which unfortunately I commanded, but due to circumstances I left the company. But my people still remain there and finish the contract. At the moment, according to information, there are more than 80 people killed as a result of this operation. More than 15 people are in captivity. So that's almost 100 people lost. This concerns our Russian comrades, military personnel who represents the interest of Russia. I, the commander of the 13th Assault Detachment, contacted people from the Africa Corps and the Special Forces trying to convey a message to the Deputy Minister of Defence. I simply asked for help, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, there is a lot, so that's translated here as well. There is a lot of video footage concerning this. Now, I won't show you the one which has just umpteen dead bodies right next to each other and burnt out vehicles and burnt body. I mean, you can basically see the proof of this. It seems to be pretty indubitable. And there's lots of other footage of the actual fighting taking place. So more footage, says Tendar. The details of the incident in Mali, where the Russian Wagner unit has been destroyed, have appeared. Among the killed Russians is Anton Yelizarov, the individual with call sign Lotus, who led the assaults against Soledar and Bakhmut in 2023. Along with him, it is now confirmed that the admin of the Telegram channel Grey Zone, so not the Grey Zone, the American media organization, which is also pro-Russian, but Grey Zone Telegram channel, which is the Wagner media megaphone. So Nikita Fedyanin, call sign White, has been killed as well. Overall, it is estimated the Tuareg rebels destroyed around 80 Russian mercenaries. Also, a detachment of the Mali junta regime lost between 17 and 50 fighters. So just an awful lot of death and destruction involved with the Russians there in a terrible ambush that has left them absolutely decimated. And then there's lots of footage of this, but also footage of a helicopter. I can't find where that. Oh, here it is. It's this one on the right. A helicopter there. Telegram rumor indicates that the Wagner helicopter was moving wounded from Tinzuatina to Kidal across several hundred kilometers of territory held by CSP forces, armed with small arms and a manpad, forced to make a hard landing in Kidal. So more than just a hard landing. So possibly a helicopter taken out as well. There's several incidents taking place, and here's that Wagner commander who was with Prigozhin in Bakhmut. He is actually now no more. And in fact, there are claims that the captured Russian fighters, captured by CSP DPA fighters from Mali, have offered the Russians to Ukraine in support and solidarity. The message to the Ukrainian brothers: dear Ukrainian brothers, we are armed CSP DPA forces. We would like to express our solidarity with your fight against Russian criminals. We have captured a significant number of Wagner mercenaries and want to give you these prisoners as a sign of support and solidarity. The gesture is aimed at help you in your struggle for justice and freedom. We hope that this will help strengthen our ties and our common victory. With all our support, the CSP DPA armed forces. So really interesting situation developing there in Mali. And Mali is a hotbed of activity, has been for some time. So as Special Kherson Cat reminds us, in Mali, the Russians and Wagner are committing a huge number of horrific crimes. One of the most notorious was a massacre of 500 people in one of the villages in Mali. A Guardian article about the massacre and Wagner presence in Mali was from 2023 is linked there. So just, it's a bit of a crazy place at the moment where Russia is heavily involved, but they were on the end of a really bloody nose there yesterday, and it appears that those rebels have offered the prisoners to the Ukrainians. So goodness me. And then that just puts what Ukraine wants is, of course, Russia to be under pressure in lots of places outside of Ukraine as well. So they want economic pressure on Russia. They want economic and financial pressure within Russia concerning their own ability to support their welfare system and their general infrastructure around the country of Russia. So that then has the result of getting the Russian population angsty about the war. They want infrastructural problems throughout Russia in terms of hydrocarbons and energy, and then things like dams falling apart, all of this stuff that makes people unhappy in Russia. And then where they're doing stuff around the world for influence operations and to try and get natural resources out of African nations, for example, they want the Russians to be under a lot of pressure there, so that Russia is playing whack-a-mole, and that leads to not being able to put full attention onto Ukraine. That is why Ukrainian special forces are operating in places like Sudan against the Wagnerites there, because this is part of the larger war against Russia. If they can stop Russia getting money from these places, then that stops them being able to fund stops the Russians being able to fund the war effort. Okay, on to distant strikes. So last night, Ukrainian Air Force said they shot down a single Kh-59 cruise missile and 7 out of the 8 Shahed drones that was sent into Ukraine. So not that many drones, 7 out of 8 shot down. There's news coming from Kharkiv that there have been rockets landing in the city. I don't know what kind of rockets. It seems to be that they have got an S-300 in that area again, possibly giving Kharkiv some undue attention. With those surface-to-air missiles used in the ground attack mode. No details other than what Tim is just reporting there at the moment. A Russian channel claims that 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles yesterday hit Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and secondary explosions could be heard. Currently unknown whether they mean at the Aviatorska air base or some kind of munitions or depot or air defense position hit. So there could be some serious hit to Dnipropetrovsk region yesterday with some ballistic missiles, but don't know. Then the big news from the Ukrainian side of things, it looks like that the Russians had suffered big time in Kursk region with drones attacking an oil depot and causing serious damage there. 2 fires were reported, one on the Medvensky district and another in Kursk. Previously in February, drones had also attacked this oil depot, causing 2 fuel tanks to catch fire. And apparently also in Kursk, a electricity substation was also hit. So General Staff at night, the airfield attacked an oil depot at Polovaya in the Kursk region. Strong explosions and fires were registered. Probably tanks with oil products caught fire. The Polovaya oil depot consists of 11 tanks with a total volume of 7,000 cubic meters and is used primarily to meet the needs of the Russian army. So this will have a tangible effect on the Russian war project. Then going to previous strikes. So as a result of the attack on the 26th, so we're now the 28th, 27th to 28th was last night. 26th is probably 2 nights ago. I can't remember now, or it might be 3 nights ago when Saki Airfield, I think it might be 3 nights actually, when Saki Airfield was targeted by the Ukrainians, and that is an airfield in Crimea. Anyway, there now appears to be evidence that a Su-30SM was destroyed and probably another Su-30SM damaged by debris, according to Cyber-Boroshno. So again, evidence of this in satellite imagery that's coming out. As is often the case, you hear about strikes, you see burning in the distance from people on their mobile phones, and then some days later, satellite imagery either confirms or doesn't quite confirm what was initially claimed. Well, not that anything was particularly claimed, we just know there are strikes on Saki, but it's good to know that some airframes have been damaged or destroyed. Now, talking about strikes, apparently the UK does not allow Ukraine to hit the Russian territory with Storm Shadow missiles because this also requires the consent of France. France produces this type of missile together with the UK, so London cannot make the decision unilaterally. There have been these rumours before that actually there are 3 people that need to agree to this. Then people are thinking it was the US. Still not sure, but it appears that the UK would be fine with the use of Storm Shadows. And France were apparently fine as far as I remember, but there was this issue between the Rassemblement National and the Macron administration. Anyway, moving on to other bits and pieces. Russian military reporter Alexander Karchenko reports that logistics on the Russian side are getting worse over time due to the abundance of drones on the Ukrainian side. So we've been hearing claims that Russia are now outproducing Ukraine in terms of drones. But these are sort of claims we've heard many times, and you hear anecdotes from both sides. And I said yesterday, look, the stats are that Ukraine is still using more drones than Russia. And someone's saying, yeah, I wouldn't trust the stats. I'm like, well, I would trust the stats. I trust the stats more than I trust anecdotes, because we've had anecdotes, claims from both sides saying the opposite thing. So we've had Ukrainians saying, yeah, we're using more drones than the Russians, and then the Ukrainians saying the Russians are using more drones than us. Okay, so one of you is wrong, and you're both Ukrainian. And we've had Russians saying the same thing. Or in fact, we haven't had Russians saying that the Russians have more drones than the Ukrainians. Actually, that only comes from the Ukrainian side. But when you look at the stats are pretty clear. And then when you look at the numbers of drones being procured from abroad and constructed, then it's hard to believe that the Russians are using more or building more drones than the Ukrainians at the moment. But they might be, right? There's just, I think they probably upped the capacities because they absolutely need to, the Russians. But there are complaints about the quality of those drones, and then there's electronic warfare being used apparently very effectively by the Ukrainians, but they're also by extension taking down a lot of their own FPV drones and whatnot too. So it's probably a really mixed picture, but I'll have to get in contact with Daniela from Turchny to find out actually what the latest stats are on drone strikes. But anyway, going back to this Russian source, said the logistics are getting worse and worse over time due to the abundance of drones on the Ukrainian side. He says that even a year ago in Robotyne, they were dismounted 1 kilometer from the positions, but now dismounting from armor takes place 8 to 10 kilometers from the front. However, there are no available solutions to the problem yet. So, I mean, if you want to go and read what is said here, you can. Shall I read this? Advanced logistics begins where trucks cannot reach. Near Robotyne in 2023, we would be throwing out the Tiger vehicle a kilometre from positions. In just a year, enemy drones began to fly much further and more often, and now the armour is unloaded 8 to 10 kilometres from the front line. Next comes advanced logistics. The needs in the front are enormous and transportation options are severely limited. They jump into quieter places using motorcycles and ATVs, and they drag everything only with their feet into the most inaccessible places. And we've seen this before. Ammunition boxes being dragged by people on the ground rather than being driven. Logistics capabilities are declining, but the needs in the front are not becoming less. So more and more places are appearing on a map where cargo can only be delivered by unmanned systems. For this, at the front, they use Mavics and FPV drones, regular ones without drops. It's impossible to carry anything heavier than a water bottle this way, and we don't have any heavy drones. There are many samples shown at exhibitions, but I have not seen them at the front lines. I've seen ground-based drones, but these are all prototypes that fall into the hands of infantry, and they stop working after a couple of days of operation. That's an interesting observation there. In the summer, green stuff forgives many logistics mistakes, so the foliage is covering up things. In autumn and winter, problems will be quadrupled. I see a solution to the problem in the use of heavy drones and unmanned platforms, and this should be done by specially trained advanced logistics teams. There is no magic wand, just hard and painstaking work that needs to start now. It's a fascinating, I think, observation there. Now, fires apparently engulfed the Donetsk mine with 86 miners inside due to Russian shelling, according to the Ukrainian, I don't know which ministry. Russian shelling in Donetsk Oblast has set fire to that mine. It's the energy ministry. So that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians there. They obviously still need to be producing their whatever it is, industrial output in order to prosecute the war. And then just finally here, President Zelensky and his wife the other day visited the Okhmadit Children's Hospital in Kiev. The children's hospital was targeted by a Russian missile on July the 8th, which destroyed the toxicology and heavily damaged the entire facility. In particular, the presidential couple visited the oncology unit. During the heinous Russian terror attack, the children in the cancer station had to be evacuated and received treatment in the open. The president vowed that the children's hospital would be fully rebuilt. So I believe there's been a lot of money that's been raised. Bit of a, was that Tottenham Hotspur? The football top there. So no, got a Spurs fan. Anyway, lots of money has been raised to help rebuild this hospital and get it back into working order. That's lovely to see. Actually, this is good, kind of obviously good PR, but that's really the sort of thing you as a president would absolutely love to have people seeing.
Ну, чим чемпіон. Як справа? Якщо чесно, дітям не можна. Це вівка, я знаю. Сильна рука. Молодець. Я зрозумів, в чому твоя сила. Білі крокси. Ще раз. Я думаю, що це хазяїн лікарні.
Помахай президенту, помахай. Ой, вибачте.
Це намалювала дитина, але вона намалювала задовго до удару. Дякую, це вам. Я не знаю, Олені чи вам.
На двох.
Що вона для нас ця картина дуже символічна.
На рахунок 3. Всі готові? Раз, два, три. Діти! Супер, усі молодці.
So I thought that was a bit of a nice, endearing video to end, you know, on a more positive note. Even though some of those kids might have terminal conditions, it's really important that they are given the welfare that they need, and to have those sort of places taken out by Russian indiscriminate bombing waves is just absolutely unacceptable. So good to see the president involved there, and that facility being rebuilt. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak to you soon.